The Conservative coping for this week's upcoming local elections has already started, and they know they are going to lose quite a lot of seats. Always remember that when we come to looking at the aftermath, that they were defending over 940 seats. So at the end of the day, we're going to have to see how many they, should we say, managed to retain versus how many they lost. The other thing is that people have to remember is, first and foremost, all those losses that they are going to take are not going to go to reform. But there's been this almost automatic insistence that, oh yeah, all the vote just instantly goes to reform. That is not the case that we have seen even from the last general election. More likely, as what we will see, is we will probably see a lot of, should we say, losses that the Conservatives are going to take. They will ultimately lose probably to a lot of independents. They will lose a lot to the Lib Dems, who, again, I think are going to be the big winners, quite frankly, of that night. And yes, I think Labour might also lose a couple of seats as well, but ultimately, I think they're probably going to do quite good in many ways. I think a lot of people are maybe counting them out and saying, "Oh, well, they're going to do absolutely terrible." I still think they might actually do quite well out of the night, but we'll see what happens when the results come in, of course. The big ones, of course, are going to be the regional mayoralships as well to watch who wins there. But always remember, turnout is going to be key in this. Just because, oh, look, Reform won this seat. Well, what was the turnout? What was the turnout? If it's abysmally low, well, then, of course, that's why they won. But don't think that that should be replicated into a general election, because you're already seeing a lot of polls replicating what that will mean for a general election, but you're basing it on an absolute awful turnout. And bear in mind, local election turnout has been in the doldrums for a number of cycles now. So don't expect it to suddenly get any better, you know? So let's go on into this, because there is a big feud coming. And that is, of course, between Badenoch and Jenrick, and the fact that their rivalry is probably now set to rip the Conservative Party apart again. Fun times ahead indeed. So, as always, thank you very much to all those people who do help and support the channel. Like I say, it is Wednesday as well, so thank you very much to everyone who does help and support, like I say, the Patreon page of the Pony Club. There will be a new video up at some point today. So watch out for that. And of course, if you do want to join that, head down below, click on the links. There's the Patreon page, there's the Buy Me Coffee link, there's the YouTube thank you button, and of course, there's the Pony Club as well. So thank you very much to everyone who does help support the channel that way. And of course, you can just by simply clicking the like and share button, and that costs you nothing. So as always, let's crack on then into this. So overgoing, coming from Conservative Home, with Peter Franklin from Unheard. Always the best salt giver, shall we say, on this, of why the Badenoch-Jenrick rivalry is without precedent in a recent Conservative history. So, last week was a good one for Kemi Badenoch. This week will be the worst of her political career so far. Again, I like that he added so far, because it is only going to get worse for her. Only going to get so much worse for her. The Conservative poll ratings are, of course, half of what they were in 2021, which is when these local seats will last up for election. This Thursday were last contested. Barring, of course, a miracle, the party will lose hundreds of councils and multiple councillors. So, probably hundreds of councillors and multiple councils. The impending disaster is mostly not of Badenoch's making. Mostly not of Badenoch's making. Consistently, we have seen from Conservative Home, from these Conservative people, that Badenoch was going to lead this amazing rally, because they fooled themselves into thinking that there was this loveless landslide that Labour had won, and that instantly they were going to get this massive turnaround, and that Britain was just secretly yearning for Conservative rule. And I am not joking about that. If you've watched any of my videos, you've seen the stuff we've covered on Conservative Home. That is their thinking. That is how they've been picturing all of this since the general election, and that hasn't changed. You've got people like Mel Stride who managed to, Mel Street, who managed to, Mel Stride Street, I can't remember how you pronounce it now, but yeah, he won like by 62 votes, thinking that he's now God's gift to conservatism. There is a very good chance at the next general election he loses his seat. A very good chance that the next general election he loses his seat, because when you are defending it against 62 votes, a lot can happen. So, but there you go. Anyway, but of course, will not silence those who can't wait to, of course, see her gone. Fortunately, she can rely at least on the support of the man who is very much likely to succeed her, Robert Jenrick, saying, "I think she's doing a bloody good job in very difficult circumstances," he said on ITV's Good Morning Britain. People should give her a break, he added. Yes, because he's like, gee, I hope I don't have to face this same criticism of not turning the party around fast enough, of not providing policies and, not doing well in the polls. Because he knows probably in about a year's time, he is going to be in that same position. And the last thing he wants is Badenoch turning around, who is going to probably retain a lot of her popularity within the party, is going to start attacking him, saying, oh, things would have been better. See, if we'd have stuck to my plan, things would have been working. And you see this tension, the rivalry that is going to be disastrous for them. So arguably, they should give her at least another year or two. But the biggest reason why they might not is, of course, Jenrick himself. You see, the current Tory leader is now doubly unfortunate. Not only does she have the large calostatic legacy of now her predecessors to contend with, but she also now has the plausible replacement sitting now in her shadow cabinet. And why on earth did she put him in the shadow cabinet? Like, why? It was just the worst possible decision I think anyone has ever made. Why on earth would you put your rival in such a prominent position in your shadow cabinet? What? This doesn't make sense. And of course, that much is even made more clearer by the recent Conservative Home League table. Again, we covered that. Jenrick topping the polls and pulling massively ahead of everyone else. The Shadow Justice Secretary is, of course, by far the most popular figure on the Tory front bench. Indeed, Henry Hill reported on the figures back in April is now adorned now with the image of Jenrick in laurels. Such is now the weight of his 60-point advantage over Badenoch. Yeah. Oh, I say, remember when we covered that? That was an insane poll lead. But bear in mind, that's where Badenoch was this time last year compared to Rishi Sunak. The party is still a mess, and they still not have solved the fundamental problems and issues of the party, which they will never solve, because to solve them, they have to look themselves in the mirror and really take a good look. And every time they've tried to do that, they've dodged it. They've dodged responsibility on it, massively so. But of course, hasn't every Tory leader had to put up with a popular rival? Well, no. The Badenoch-Jenrick juxtaposition is in fact highly unusual. One can even hardly deny the chronic instability of the top of our party, but the most part that hasn't been caused by rivalrous presence over an oven-ready successor. Let me prove it to you. So, from 1997 to the present day, there have been 9 Conservative leaders. The first, of course, was William Hague, who is in a remarkably similar position to the current leader, both now from the centre-right of the party. Badenoch is not from the centre-right of the party. She's even more to the right of the party, let's say that. Both had only quick 2 years' experience as cabinet ministers to look over after the landslide defeat. As leadership rivals, if Badenoch has had Jenrick, then Hague had, of course, Michael Portillo, who was widely regarded as the more impressive politician. But, of course, Michael Portillo lost, shall we say. So he wasn't even in the party. Of course, another parallel then is not, of course, the exact one. Portillo obviously famously lost his seat in the 97 election and didn't even return to the House of Commons until the end of 99. Thus, there was at least more than 2 years for Hague to dig in as leader. No such luck for Badenoch. In any case, when Haig did finally step down after losing the 2001 general election, it wasn't Portillo who became leader, but Ian Duncan Smith. Like Haig, IDS was harried by disloyal colleagues, but not by a declared rival. Indeed, he was replaced in 2003 by Michael Howard, who served more as a caretaker than a genuine leader. As part of his interim phase, the internal dissent was, of course, then suppressed by Howard's eventual successor, David Cameron, and was a protege, not a rival. And all that Tory chaos, you've got to remember, it wasn't until Cameron came along and really settled a lot of that stuff. Like, really settled a lot. And we've talked about this in the past, but Cameron, when you look at what he did in the party, moving it more to like a center-right party, again, ironically, where a lot of the problems of really the Conservative Party started, because, when Cameron was winning, that shift was fine. When he wasn't winning, when the party wasn't winning, that's when things started not to be okay. When you start to see stuff around Europe, stuff around the EU going on there as well. So Cameron, of course, would get more than a decade as leader. But while his time, of course, at the top was long and eventful, active rivals were, of course, very thin on the ground. The man he defeated in the leadership contest, David Davis, might have had even become famous and the focus for internal dissent. But Davis's shock decision to force a by-election in his own seat was self-disqualifying. In any case, the right-wing opposition and Cameronism became now increasingly externalized in the form of Nigel Farage. And exactly that is what happened. Rather than having an internal rival, Farage became the focus point for outside the party for dissatisfied Conservatives. That is what led to the rise of UKIP. The Brexit Party, Reform Now, where you have it. It's not a real party. It's for all those dissatisfied Conservatives to join. And that is still the case with Reform. Because I guarantee you now, after this election, we will see a lot of local councillors suddenly defect to Reform, just as we have seen for the past couple of years. Remember, the current state of the Reform UK in councillors, the vast majority of those who are Reform councillors have never been put to an electoral test. They defected, mostly from the Conservatives. So always remember that. And as I keep on reminding you, 14 wins out of 240 by-elections that have happened since the election do not make a good electoral record. For a party that is so popular and, according to recent polls, will win the next general election in a landslide, the polls say one thing, but reality and the actual election stuff, the voting, the contests that matter far, far more, for some reason aren't talked about. It's more, look at these fantastic polls. So, yeah, always remember that Reform, doing so well in the polls, but when it comes to actual election wins, it's not turning out like that. So, anyway, back, of course, to this. So at this point, we should, of course, bring Boris Johnson into the story. He is, of course, someone with a star quality to rival, of course, both rival Farage and Cameron. Yet, pardon me, as Mayor of London from 2008 to 2016, this particular prince was stuck across the water at least until the Brexit referendum campaign. So, for most of this period, the only other potential leader was George Osborne. But he was Cameron's now closest ally, another anointed heir, and could afford to wait his turn. I would always argue that Cameron knew that Boris was across the Thames, eyeing Westminster very greedily with his eyes. He knew what he wanted, and he wanted to be Prime Minister. That was no secret. Yes, he wasn't in the party, but he was always out there, always that outlier being, so quote good as mayor of London. He wasn't. That's an entirely different story of Boris's track record as mayor of London, but not really. So anyway, back to this. So, of course, so we all thought. The unprecedented result of the Brexit referendum upended careers all over Westminster. One, of course, of the very few winners was Theresa May, who then became leader of the other leadership campaigns collapsed then one by one. Yeah, because they all realized, oh, no one wants to take this poison chalice. And poor Theresa May was the last one to sort of take it, thinking that she could, do it. Again, I don't think Theresa May is a very good politician. She's responsible for like a lot of the problems we see now with the immigration system we have in the UK. But I do have a small, very small, tiny of iota of sympathy for her that she took on that position, knowing full well the poison chalice she had been given. But anyway, back to this one. She then, of course, faced a very entrenched opposition in a Brexit policy. The credible rivals to her leadership of the party took years to emerge. Even after the calamity of the 2017 snap election, she clung to power because no one could think of anybody to replace her with. Johnson had still not recovered from his mysterious abortive launch of his 2016 leadership campaign, and Osborne had made the fateful premature decision to stand down as an MP. But oh boy, was Johnson not the stalking horse that everyone knew was going to replace May. Anyway, it wasn't then until 2019 that the party was then ready to give Johnson a second chance. However, it wasn't the cause. He wasn't, of course, the cause of May's downfall. She would have had to resign anyway after the Commons' wide rejection of a Brexit deal. So once again, we have the tale of Tory disunity, but one, of course, driven by the crash of rivals and claimants now to the throne. Of course, once he was in power, Johnson found himself continually undermined by his worst enemy. That person himself, however, was himself. As much as now the die-hard Borisites want to try and blame Sunak, it was his own goal of Partygate that destroyed the pandemic prime minister. It wasn't just Partygate. It was the scandals. It was the constant lying that did it. Partygate was just the cherry on the cake. It wasn't even the thing that eventually brought him down. It was the whole Chris Pincher stuff that was like the final straw that broke the camel's back on that. So that's very much misremembering a very key piece of Tory history there. Indeed, such was, of course, the irresistibility of Sunak's rise to power that party members chose Liz instead. As you may recall, she didn't last long. I suppose Sunak could have been, of course, described as a rival before just a brief time in office, but before she could say, where he could say, "I told you so," she was gone. Sunak then, of course, lacked rivals during his unsuccessful stint as party leader. Yes, lacked rivals during his unsuccessful stint as party leader. Meanwhile, every single member of his cabinet was lining up, literally ready to replace him. Again, convenient replacement of Tory history there. As things went from then bad to worse, someone could and should have emerged as a, quote, no change, no chance candidate. But by 2024, his cabinet and colleagues had clearly given up the will to fight, and Johnson had already resigned his seat. So we arrive now back at the present, where Badenoch is, of course, unique amongst the last 9 party leaders, having now her hotly tipped successor sat right beside her. One, therefore, has to ask why they find themselves in such an unusual, awkward situation. So it is because of the direction of the party. It is because of policy. Badenoch has barely announced any policy, but the second she does, as we've said this before, the division lines will reopen again. It will be the hard right of the party versus the, quote, wets, or the more moderates, the more centrists of the party, and they will go to war again. They will fight out each other for what they think is the best policy for the party. And you will get another potential Rwanda situation where the right really wants this dumb policy that they know is not going to work. And that all the centrists go, why are we doing this? This is so foolish. This is so dumb. Why are we doing this? Um, yeah, it's going to break out again the second she announces policy. So back to this. So the root of this problem all lies in last year's leadership contest. This should have settled the matter of who leads, at least for a few years. After all, that is the purpose of the exercise, i.e., there's a race, the winner gets laurels, and the loser either knuckles down or goes into exile. But the problem was they were not allowed to do so. They were all, crying unity. Ben Houchen's message for, peace and ceasefire did not go into, went into effect. And as a result, they never got to have that mudslinging match, that bare knuckled boxing match that we were all expecting, if you remember. And I apologize profusely because I was expecting that contest to be such an absolute, like, clown circus, and it never went that way, unfortunately. But anyway, back to this. But maybe the next one will be. Anyway, back to this. Unfortunately, however, the 2024 race was a sham. Oh, that's very interesting for him to say that. The arguments, of course, that the party desperately needed to have with itself were then smothered in the name of unity. And most pathetically, there was the quote final TV debate between Badenoch and Jenrick, in which the candidates never actually debated with one another. Again, very true. In theory, Badenoch was, of course, the chief beneficiary of the stitch-up. I love that. Oh, the stitch-up. Oh, he's not happy that Badenoch won, if he's quoting about that, because you obviously may remember a lot of conservatives around that time were complaining that this final two debate never really got underway. And there was the whole thing about James cleverly pulling his really clever tactic that lost himself the nomination. But there you go. Anyway, but in practice, she then became, of course, the biggest loser. The unresolved tension never goes away. It's very true. It has not gone away. It just manifests, of course, in another form. In this case, the ongoing compare and contrast with now Jenrick. So, what can the two of them do about it? Well, in this case, nothing rash. It is not in this interest to be making, of course, sudden moves. Indeed, now, with his evident indication now to very much bide his time while using it constructively. Yep. When Jenrick takes the throne, Jenrick will intend to pull an absolute coup. Anyone who disagrees with Jenrick will be banished to the back benches, and all the Jenrick loyalists will take the front bench. They will be in the shadow cabinet. That is what is going to happen. Badenoch, I will be very, very shocked if she ends up in the shadow cabinet. Badenoch should also tread very carefully. She, of course, can't sack Jenrick because he's given her no good reason to do so. She could, of course, try and tighten the leash, insisting that he keeps strictly to his brief, but pardon me, that would, of course, make her look very weak and insecure. It would also set a very terrible example for other cabinet members, shadow cabinet members, who should be outraged, who should at least be encouraged to, of course, try and max Jenrick's energy and initiative. Oh, yeah. Allow Jenrick to basically outperform your party leader and basically perform a constant ongoing audition to why he should be the better party leader. Gee, encourage them all to do that, right? Anyway, much better then, of course, to promote him. Then to what? To bump up to the Shadow Chancellor, Foreign Secretary, Home Secretary. That would mean, of course, shoving aside other useful allies. Again, that's not going to happen. It would be a very wisey and ballsy move, of course, would be to make, of course, Jenrick the deputy leader, a currently vacant position. Once in place, he could then be given very specific responsibilities for the political renewal process, for even overhauling the party's campaign operations. That way, his success becomes her success. Or, basically, hey, I'm so good as deputy leader, right? Why should I not be full leader? Gee, what a fantastic idea. Making your assassin the cupbearer, where he has full, abilities to be able to just, put a little drop of poison in the king's cup. Gee, what an amazing position to be put in. Anyway, if nothing else, the meeting now, a personally fraught but very necessary partnership would, of course, be very useful in practice. Because if Farage cannot handle Jenrick, then what chance does she have? Of course, with Farage, the chance is none. And bear in mind, neither would Jenrick, because if Reform voters are not going to vote for Kemi Badenoch doing a Nigel Farage impression, why on earth are they going to vote for Robert Jenrick, who also will do a Nigel Farage impression, when they can have Nigel Farage? Why vote? Why have you know, uh, new Coke when you've got old Coke at home? you know. So once again, you can already see them going, well, we should stick up for Badenoch, and eventually, when, oh boy, I'm sure this guy is going to be calling for Kimi's head in a couple of weeks' time. I can guarantee you that. He'll refer back to this piece and go, oh yeah, you see, I should have said, unity. Badenoch and Jenrick should team up. That ain't happening. That ain't happening, because since 2016, the Conservatives have had a very brutal way about how they act as leader, how much power they have as leader, and that they are the king of the party, and that they should not be challenged. That is not how you should run a political party. But that is how it has happened. That is how it has come about. And there are still fundamental problems within the party that they need to sort out. And the question, of course, in and around Brexit is one that they still need to have an internal discussion about, but they're not going to have that, at least not yet. But eventually, oh boy, they will. Not yet, but give it a couple of years. I guarantee you they'll be having an internal discussion about Brexit. Was it really a good idea for us to go down this Brexit path when we can see in the polls? But anyway, let me know what you think about that. Should, as Franklin put there, that Badenoch and Jenrick team up, or would that essentially, as I said, just giving, should we say, Jenrick more easy access to stab Badenoch in the back when the time comes? Because ultimately, that's what that would really be doing. And Jenrick knows he is biding his time. He knows, regardless, when she finally fails, and she will, like I say, give it a year, Jenrick will be leader. Give it a year and Jenrick will be leader. I guarantee you that now. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.